All right, I believe I'm live now. Just let me go ahead and share this real quick. Just gonna go ahead and share this. Just give me a few seconds, everyone. Okay, good. All right. Peace and blessings, everybody. Hey, it's Matt So Real here. I know I haven't been around for a while, but I wanted to do a short little piece here. Hold on just a second. It looks like we have some. Well, you know what? I'll go ahead and add them in when I'm done. It shouldn't take me that long. But of course, it's no longer All Hallows Eve, which is our topic tonight. It's no longer All Saints Day. That was yesterday. Today is All Souls Day. This is, the day where basically the church, especially the Western church, begins to make prayers for those who they believe are in purgatory. Now, of course, Eastern Orthodox, they don't believe that, but they still do prayers, for those who have passed in general. But what I'm doing today is basically something that that I kind of started on my Facebook about a few weeks ago. I put up a question because of the constant mishistory and the mishandlings of history around the holidays, right? And the first runner up is always Halloween. And so I basically started off by asking people all over Facebook just whether you think it is pagan or Christian. And let's just say if you go ahead to my Facebook, Matthew Solly, you can go ahead and read some very interesting stuff. I will say off the bat, this is not everything. If you want a fuller version of this, definitely check out what I did last year. And I believe I only released that on, oh no, that's on my YouTube channel as well. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and just get right into this. I call this piece Halloween is Christian, not pagan. I know a lot of you guys are thinking, well, of course it's pagan. Look at what everyone's doing today. Look at what everyone is saying, where it came from. You probably heard everyone say that Halloween came from Samhain, the Celtic festival where they basically sought after the dead and made sure that they did things to, make sure to stave away their wrath and all kind of things. But let me go ahead and just get started. So a lot of times you will hear people say all kinds of things. So for example, I'm going to start off with a series of quotes and they're going to come from certain authors and books and voices. And, it basically talks about how Sam Hain covers the day on which the ancient Druids held the feast of Saman. You have other authors for the yearbook of daily recreation information. They end up saying that, the Samhain or Saman festival, which is celebrated by the people of Persia on the first day of the month of Aban, is a time of great rejoicing and feasting, and is observed with much ceremony and pomp. Also, you got people that will say, quote, the festival of Samhain, which corresponded with the Roman festival of Pomona and the Christian festival of All Hallows Eve, now called Halloween, was a time of great significance in the Celtic world. You got other people who end up saying, quote, the Feast of Samhain among what? The Celts seems to have been particularly a ghostly significance. It was then that the dead revisited their ancient haunts and joined with unfettered freedom in the domestic festivities of living kinsfolk who feasted and made merry at their coming. Chambers tells us, perhaps with some little coloring of the facts, that the name Samhain was given to Halloween by the Celts in memory of Saman, their lord of death. And that comes from the magic arts, Celtic Britain. And also, you have another quote: the eve of Saman has evidently been appropriated by the church to serve as All Hallows Eve. So he's making a connection here. Saman was a name applied to the sun as a source of light and heat. And the festival in this honor took place at the beginning of summer or on the first day of May. Now we'll get into that a lot more. On this day, too, was held the great fire festival of the Celts called Beltane. Now, what is the number one problem with all these quotes? They're late. They're too late to the game. Look at the dates. 1786. That comes from Henry Bourne's Antiquitas Vulgaris. You got 1846, William Holmes, the yearbook, the Salmon Festival. Also, you have what? 1895, Stuart Glennie's Arthurian localities, cities, Samhain as a pagan festival corresponding with Halloween. You got 1945 by Spence Lewis, 1895 by John Reese. But what's the problem? If you look at 1786, it provides no additional details. That's it. 1846, it does not explicitly tie them to Halloween customs of whatever it's talking about in that book when you read it. You got the 1895 Stewart. It does not expand on the relationship that it tries to draw between Samhain and Halloween. And it just goes on and on and on. That is number one issue with a lot of these, quote unquote ancient voices. You can see that they're not very ancient. They're actually kind of modern. So you have to ask the question, where in the world are people getting this idea from in 1786, 1895, and whatsoever? Why in the world can't we just go back and see if maybe some of the ancient voices said the same thing as the modern voices? If they do, then this video is over. But if they don't, well, you have to question why in the world did they have to say these things if perhaps the ancient voices don't say these things. So let me see something here. Let's go back to the ancient voices. Let's go way before 1780, whatever. I'm going to go back to the 10th or 11th century. This right here comes from Serglij Konkulanin, and it basically means the sick bed of Kuchulanin. And it was written in the 10th or 11th century. And this is what it has to say about Samhain. Now, you tell me what you think. It says, quote, every year the men of Ulster were accustomed to hold festival together. And the time when they held it was for 3 days before Samhain, the summer's end, and for 3 days after that day, and upon Samhain itself. At the time that is spoken of is that when the men of Ulster were in the plain of Merthemne, and they were used to keep that festival every year, nor was there anything in the world that would not, at that time, they would do except for the sports and the marketings and the splendors and pomps and feasting and eating. And it is from that custom that the festival of the Samhain has descended, that is now held throughout the whole world. Now, what's the problem? That image on the left with the voice from the 10th or 11th century is not saying at all what the image on the right from the 17 and 1900s are saying. I mean, it pretty much kind of sounds like the things that we kind of do for Thanksgiving. We get together, you know what I mean? We watch sports, probably don't play sports, but we watch sports. We have feasting, we have eating, and it really just sounds like a harvest festival. And if you were living back then, that would pretty much be the way that you kind of celebrate, the end of all of your farming. So to us historians, it's not a shock that they would talk about Samhain like this. But it's a shock for people who basically say that Samhain is this pagan festival that pretty much what everybody else in the 17, 1800s is saying. So you have to ask a question. If this is what the people are saying themselves in the 10th or 11th century, where in the world are people getting this idea from? You know what? Before we even get there, let's do another one. This is called the Laws of Hywel, and it was written around 1285. Now, the calendar from the Laws of Hywel, which dates back to 1285, It uses the calends of winter, and that is affix the end to an economic activity. However, no festival is mentioned in the calendar. And so it's important to note that King Howell lived at a time after the festival of All Saints Day. So he lived way after it was actually introduced to the British Isles. And the manuscript comes well after the November 1st date had been established in the region. Therefore, the calendar does not provide any information about Samhain nor its claims of ritual. So we could even look at this calendar here that talks about the calends of winter, and guess what it's missing? It's missing Samhain. It's missing any pagan rituals. It doesn't say anything about this at all. So this is the second time we can go back to primary sources, and they don't say anything about how people are saying what Samhain is today. Therefore, so far there's no connection that Samhain has to Christians celebrating their victorious dead. That's an issue. I'll give you one more. Now, this right here is a glossary. It was written in around probably 908 AD, but the manuscript that we have it from, they copied it, is from the 15th century. Now, of course, a glossary is what? Like an ancient dictionary. So this person that wrote it down basically decided to write down, pretty much most of the words that they were using at that time. It says here, the Sinas Cormac, also known as the Cormac's Glossary, is an early Irish glossary that contains etymologies and expands over 1,400 Irish words. Ascribed to the Cormac Mac Cullaine, who died in 908 AD. The glossary is significant because it mentions Beltane and the rituals around it, but does not mention Samhain at all, due to the fact that it describes some detail of pagan practice at Beltane, but it is not likely that Samhain was eliminated out of religious prejudice. And basically they're saying that because there's this idea that ever since the Celts were Christianizing things, and a lot of the monks were their descendants, and they wanted to go ahead and preserve some of their history of their ancestors, and they did kind of write down some pagan things that their ancestors did, so we can thank the monks for giving us like the history of their ancestors. He's saying that Samhain was not eliminated out of any religious prejudice. And that's true, because all you had was people who were going up there, being missionaries, dying for the faith. And despite them being dying for the faith and being martyred, it flourished and caught on anyway. Christianity flourished and caught on anyway. So it says, however, the absence of any mention of Samhain in the glossary suggests that it was not a significant festival at the time that the glossary was written. And what is that? 908 AD. So again, that's something to think about. You think that no matter what side you're on, whether you're Christian, whether you're pagan, whatever, you think that you would, somehow catch a certain common word in the air and write it down. But whatever the nature of Samhain was back then, it wasn't good enough or popular enough to make it into that glossary, which again calls into question why people believe that Samhain has these being roots of All Saints Day. So the absence of any information of Samhain in the glossary is consistent with the lack of historical evidence for Samhain as a religious festival. Period. So you got to ask yourself again, where in the world is this coming from? Why do you have all these little authors that I got at the bottom, and I'm pretty sure there are a lot more? Why were they saying what they're saying? Because if they weren't getting it from, any ancient voices that were saying the opposite, then who did they get it from? Now, this is an AI image right here. This is not the image of the actual man here, but the first person ever in existence to kind of put out a lot of things we hear about Halloween today actually come from this man right here, Geoffrey Keating. Geoffrey Keating, 1569 to 1644. This is what he says. This is a Roman Catholic mystic. He says, quote, there the fire of Talakhtha was instituted, at which it was their custom to assemble and bring together the Druids of Ireland on the eve of Samhain to offer sacrifice to all the gods. It was at that fire they used to burn their victims, and it was of obligation under penalty of fine to quench the fires of Ireland on that night, and the men of Ireland were forbidden to kindle fires except from that fire. And for each fire was kindled from it in Ireland, the king of Munster received a tax of a scribble, or 3 pence, since the land on which Taglatha is belongs to the part of Munster given to Meath. So you can see that he's speaking about these certain fires and sacrifices to all the gods that basically happen on Samhain, and he actually brings a king into it. And of course he talks about taxes and things, but he's the first person to put forth something like this, and it's because of this one guy right here that sparked off Jacob Grimm, James Frazier. I actually found James Frazier in a lot of places, including a link that someone gave me during our Facebook conversation, and James Frazier's name came up in some kind of encyclopedia. Now you have John Reese, Jeffrey Grants, you have McKenna, and these individuals begin to go ahead and tout about some of the things that Jeffrey Keating started. So it says here with Grimm Jacob, he was a German philanthropist, right? He was a jurist. He was also a mythologist. It says in 1883, I believe he wrote the Teutonic mythology, and he spoke about how it was on religious fire his claim had based on his source, which repeated Keating. But Grimm claims that the Yule log and Samhain are equivalent religious expressions without regard to cultural, seasonal, or regional differences. So again, a lot of times, if I were to go ahead and sum these up, you can pretty much read these for yourselves. But when I end up looking at these guys, I saw that the later scholarship that came right after them, probably less than a generation later, started to look at their own claims from their books, and basically scholarship rejected them. And I can understand why. They looked at everything objectively. They did what we do today. They looked at all the primary sources, and by the end of the day, they saw that a lot of things they were saying were found wanting. So again, that's something that you might want to think about. I'll go ahead and read James Frazier's here, since he seems to kind of be a bit more popular here. It says, was the first to suggest that Samhain was an ancient pan-Celtic festival of the dead that had been taken over by the church. So notice that whatever Keating said, James Frazier, once again, they kind of add to this roll ball of this mythological kind of history they have here going on. And from there, it continues to pick up steam by other people. So again, these are the kind of people that were early on saying these things, whether it's in universities or colleges or whatever. And then from there, the next generation just pretty much rollballed it from there. But these are the 5 main guys where it picked up after Keating. So again, you got to ask yourself, okay, where in the world do we go from here, especially when it comes to the Christians? Because if we're looking at the claims of, everyone, the neo-pagans saying that, hey, you got your stuff from us, then we have to ask the question, if all what they're saying can't be found in any primary sources of any time, then what were the Christians actually doing? I mean, enough with Samhain and there's no connection at all. Then what in the world were they doing? Was it really Christian? Well, yeah. So the 2 things I like to start with are souling and guising, because a lot of times when we think about trick or treat, we always think, well, it must tie back to, once again, Samhain, something Celtic pagan festival, yada yada. But we just buried that. So where did it come from? Well, it was Christian. A lot of the sources I found was basically from the 1300s, and we know what was going on during the 1300s. The plague. People around you were dying. Okay? So what were you going to do? It says here, souling on the left, that's more of the Christian thing. Guising was more of a secular thing. Notice I didn't say pagan. I said secular. And there's a reason for that. Check this out. The practice of souling was traced back to the 13th century, when poor people would go door to door singing and begging for soul cakes, which were small cakes made from bread and currants in exchange for praying for the dead. This practice was known as souling and was believed to help the deceased soul reach heaven more quickly. Now, this comes from a quote. It's from The Customs of London. It was written in 1305 AD by Arnold Fitzfedmar. So this is an ancient voice. He says, quote, the poor people used to go from parish to parish, singing and begging for soul cakes. On every anniversary of the Day of the Dead, the poor people used to go from parish to parish, singing and begging for soul cakes. So he kind of, I guess they're a bit repetitive back then, but you could basically see that people would, and you can look this up. Like I said, not everything is in here. You can look this up. People would take turnips, they put a candle inside the turnip, and of course they carve some type of, area where the light can come out. Maybe they carved a face, and then from there they went from door to door. Someone would give them a soul cake, and in exchange for that, they would go to some kind of church or whatever by the end of the day, and they would pray for that person's family member to get out of purgatory. Now, that's very convenient for, someone who is living during the plague. You want something to eat, and so you exchange it for a prayer. Who in the world will put a light of a candle inside of a turnip? No one has any reason to do that. And yet, that light in there, that candle, is supposed to represent someone's soul. Of course, this is like, to us, it's like, duh. But it's funny because, none of this has any pagan origins. So this is where it's coming from. Now, it's funny because the same author actually says something else as well when it came to the secular folk. Now, remember, you're in a time during the plague. You're hungry. People are getting sick. People are dying. You need some food. So what are you going to do? You're likely going to probably take advantage of anything that could put a meal on the table, or at least in your hand. It says here, guising was a medieval tradition which people would dress up in costume and go door to door asking for food or money. That's a short version. The longer version is they would put on whole little skits, whole little plays. It'd be so great. The people would hear, oh, here, take some money, oh, that was so good. Here, God bless you. Here you go. So I guess some of the secular folks saw what the Christians kids were doing or whatever. And like any corporate person, they turned it into a business. It's 1300s. Makes sense. It says, quote, on All Saints' Day, the youths of the city went out into the streets in the guise of spirits or devils and begged for food and drink. Now, once again, it's interesting that these are the kind of like secular kids that are doing this, because they already see that, you have all the Christian kids that are pretty much going there and, they're actually partaking of soul cakes, asking for prayers of the dead, things like that. And yet also there's something I left out because, like I said, not everything is in here. People, adults and children, would dress up as saints and do processions around their churches during this day, because sometimes they weren't, they didn't have enough money to go ahead and parade statues of the saints around their churches. So you can see where the idea is kind of coming from here in terms of like, who is being inspired from who. Now, another thing it says, medieval Chester, 15th century, likely on All Saints' Day, quote, the children of the poor went about the streets in the evening, dressed up as fantastic garbs, and begged for money, apples, ale, or whatever else they could get. And that comes from the History of the Country, Palatine, and the City of Chester by George Ormond, 1819. So when it comes to souling, you got one thing that's real spiritual going on. When it comes to guising, well, it's more like I can entertain you, for food and drink, or I could scare you or something. And so you can see where this idea is kind of coming from, you know, especially if people believe that, hey, I'm going to go and pray for the souls in purgatory and things like that. Well, you know, it seems that if someone's going to go ahead and, dress in the guise of spirits or devils, once again, the phrase devils, is that a Christian thing or a pagan thing? Obviously, it's a Christian thing. So again, you can see where a lot of these ideas are coming from, even if they kind of went in ways that, well, the church wouldn't approve of. But no one can say that all these things that are going on in the 1300s, no one can say, oh, that's pagan. Look at the words that they're using: spirits or devils. Again, those are Christian phrases, especially devil's part. Begging for food and drink, where did they get that idea from? Oh, demon night. This one was very interesting. A lot of times people think that Demon Night comes from Guy Fawkes Night. I used to think that too, but I'm still kind of on the fence about this one. You'll see where I'm going with this. Mischief Night is what Demon Night was first called. So I wanted to go ahead and look up what Mischief Night was. Now you think that Mischief Night would have led to Guy Fawkes Night, because that's what I thought it would lead to. When I looked up what Mischief Night was, I found out it doesn't lead to Guy Fawkes Night. Maybe it might intertwine somewhere when it comes to America, I guess. But when I looked up its origin of why it started, nope. It says here the poor often sought any opportunity to overthrow the unjust social order of the corrupt atrocities or corrupt aristocracies throughout Europe. Mischief Night would come on the eve of May Day. So now we got to ask a question. Okay, well, what's May Day? Before I even unpack May Day, I want to say a little bit more about Mischief Night. Basically, it went like this. You already had a corrupt aristocracy. These are basically the higher class folk. And oh, that's my wife in the background. She laughing. It's cool. And they weren't very nice to the poor. Matter of fact, if you actually go ahead and do your studies about, the Roman Catholic West, the nobility, and of course, the kings, you will always notice that it was a Roman Catholic Church through their monasteries and monks that will always go ahead and have all these services for the poor, whether it's like hospitals, orphanages, just feed the poor. I don't know, you call it food bank or whatever. Either way, they had these heavy ministries for the poor, and pretty much they were there to kind of like offset of a lot of the mistreatments that were going on with the nobility. Because like I said, nobility, they just used the poor class. They just used the serfs. And of course, if you want to keep the economy stable and from erupting, you have to quell that. And so the church, for a while, it really did add a lot of balance. It kept a lot of uprisings from going on. Not saying that it never happened, but that was pretty much the relationship. And so where Mischief Night comes in, Mischief Night was made because they wanted to go ahead and overthrow the social order. And so they would basically take advantage of these certain, I guess, seasonal holidays or whatever, and they would basically create mischief to overthrow the aristocracy. So let me go ahead and show you that this stuff has a lot of back history. You got Martin Luther. Of course, we know that a lot of the peasants and the serfs and the poor people basically looked at his message as a way to free and better their lives. You should look up something called the Peasants' War. Luther's teachings were basically interpreted by peasants as justification for social equality and freedom from oppressive nobles. And of course, back then, if you lived in the 1500s, yeah, you look for anything to better your life and to overthrow what was going on. I've heard some horror stories of what was going on in Germany, how this uh, empress or princess basically forced the people to go to the seashores to collect these seashells for some economic reason that was really helping her. And long story short, she put those people in overtime, and the peasants didn't like that. Other times they wouldn't even pay them. I'm starting to get into my lesson from last year, but peasants revolted against nobles abusing them, citing Luther's arguments for spiritual equality before God. Initially, Luther encouraged peasants to petition nobles peacefully, but told them not to rebel violently. As the revolt escalated, Luther condemned the peasants and urged nobles to, quote, smite, slay, and stab in order to crush the uprising. Luther came to side with the nobles against the poor peasants, retracting his calls for social reform. So you can see how that pretty much played out. People are starting to, like your message, but then they're starting to use it in ways that you're not approving of. You're trying to stay neutral, but then the side gets so extreme, you're like, you know what? Y'all are crazy. Nobles, do what you got to do. By the end of that whole thing, yeah, you would feel kind of guilty. You had blood on your hands. That wasn't pretty, but look at what they did. This is the main one. King Henry VIII. He wanted to go ahead and divorce his wife. We know the story. The Catholic Church wouldn't allow them. They didn't have no fault divorce back then. So what did he do? In short, he pretty much made his own church. But when he made his own church, something happened. All the monasteries, the Catholic monasteries, were basically that were in his land that he is ruling over since he created his own church. And those places are on his land. He pretty much confiscated all those services that the monasteries were doing, which made the nobles happy. And I guess he turned those monasteries into mansions and all the land that went with it. And you could see that his nobility friends were happy. Well, guess who wasn't happy? The poor people that were benefiting from all of those orphanages and hospitals and food and everything that those monks and those monasteries were doing for the poor. Now all of a sudden it was horrible. I've read how the rich got richer and the poor got poorer. To put it shortly, there's other people that were really unpacking what actually happened economically because of that. To make a long story short, it went like this: the rich got richer and the poor got poorer. This is the background as to why people would take advantage of certain days of celebration and try to flip the social order. This is where it's coming from. Hence, Mischief Night, hence, Demon Night. Now, May Day meets Mischief Night. Now, I didn't end up talking about May Day, because this is, the day that they actually did this. Well, what in the world was May Day anyway? May Day represents the earliest of these festivities with origins dating back to medieval European spring festivals and pagan rituals of at least the 13th century. We keep going back to the 13th century. You notice that? Traditional May Day involved the crowning of a May Queen, Morris dancing around decorated maypoles, and similar revelries. Sounds like they're just celebrating how spring is coming back. Mischief Night found its first occurrence into these May Day traditions as the eve of May Day became associated with pranks, vandalism, and disorderly behavior. Initially in the British Isles in the 1700s, there is a reference from the 1790s, Lancashire, mentioning, quote, mischief night pranks occurring on the last day of April. Now, again, You got to think about that. So now you see the people are basically trying to overthrow the social order by usurping regular holidays that they would celebrate. Now you're probably wondering, well, where in the world was Guy Fawkes Night and all this? Again, now do I cover that? I don't think I cover that as much. But what I will say is the reason for the emergence of Mischief Night can be traced back to the social and economic conditions of the time. King Henry's confiscation of Catholic monasteries in the 16th century had a key impact on the poor, the sick, and the orphans who relied on the monasteries for support. The confiscation made the noble class richer and the poorer class poorer, which caused the poor to create backlashes such as Mischief Night. As Steve Rout writes in his book, quote, The English Year, a month-by-month guide to the nation's customs and festivals from May Day to Mischief Night, quote, the disillusion of the monasteries in the 16th century had a profound effect on the poor who had relied on them for support. The resulting poverty and social unrest led to a rise in crime, including the practice of Mischief Night. Now, again, this doesn't mean that that Mischief Night is the exclusive origin of why these people are doing these uprisings. No, if you lived back then, you probably took advantage of all kinds, including Guy Fawkes. Now, it's funny because if you really look, we know that when it came to Anglicanism, well, if you had a Protestant on the throne, everyone was Protestant. Catholics are dying. Same thing. If you had a Catholic on the front throne, the Protestants, some of them are dying. There is a story that I do know of where the Protestants were on the throne, you had Parliament, and they basically made it. I believe it was in France or England. I can't remember which one, but they made it illegal to be Catholic. So you had these stories of hundreds of Catholic priests being killed. They had to go ahead and do mass in people's houses in secret. And there's even one story where they killed an entire village. This is historically documented. Like they left nobody alive. And so that was a backlash that some of the Catholics said, look, this is too much. So a few Catholic guys got together. I think there was about 12, 13 of them. One of the guys was a guy named Guy Fawkes. Their plan was to blow up Parliament. So as the story goes, they got the little, gunpowder there, and it's all in this little secret area. Maybe it's in an alleyway somewhere close to Parliament, maybe in Parliament somewhere. And want to try to kill the king. And I don't know if somebody ratted, or I don't know if a cop just happened to get lucky, but they found Guy Fawkes guarding this gunpowder. I guess it was covered up in something, but it looked a little too, suspect. Long story short, they caught him. He confessed, and I think he was, put to death. Yeah, he was heavy put to death. And so now the Protestants, pretty much back then, would make fun of them, and basically called it, I believe, firework night or bonfire night. And from there, at I think as early as it was 1605, 16 something, where they pretty much had fireworks and things like that. And then from there, other Protestants started masking themselves up, saying, "Hey, give me your beer, give me your food, or else it would go door to door. I'm Guy Fawkes. I'm Guy Fawkes." So you can see once again the poor are kind of taking advantage of trying to get some daily food, get some something, but so just notice that the poor are constantly trying to do things to get a meal, better their lives or something. Either way, the stuff is somehow still connected. But so that's all I have for that. And basically, I end up saying that over time, the customs of Mischief Night shifted to coincide with Guy Fawkes Day instead, likely due to the long-standing Guy Fawkes masking traditions already presented in England on November 5th. So by the 19th century, references emerge of Mischief Night being tied to Guy Fawkes Eve rather than May Eve. And of course, we know Guy Fawkes is November 5th. May is May 1st. So I guess, I don't know, man. Either way, you can see how a lot of this stuff is intertwined in terms of what season happens when, what season was dropped, and when something was transferred to the fall time. Where if you could rob people during the harvest time, there'd probably be more bang for your buck if you were to put this together. It says a link to the Devil's Night or Devil's Night appears to originate much later and locally in 20th century Detroit. As Halloween vandalism rose, October 30th became nicknamed Devil's Night as a moniker for the escalating mischief and mayhem. So May Day represents the earliest of these traditions, followed by Mischief Night growing out of it, and finally Devil's Night connecting centuries later, yet isolated to a specific locale. The origins of Mischief Night itself can be traced back to the social and economic conditions of the time, particularly the impact of King Henry VIII's confiscation of the Catholic monasteries on the poor. So again, keep on asking questions. Where's all these pagan stuff coming from? If every time I look at the pagans, they're talking about harvests. And every time I look at the economic times, whether it's good or bad, whether it's in a harvest time or whether it's in the plague, I keep on finding poor people doing a bunch of Christian stuff, to the point where some of the poor people started doing non-Christian stuff, that was connected to economics. It wasn't connected to anything pagan. This is what you have when you actually look back in history. So finally, what in the world were the Christians doing even at earlier times? We already saw what they were doing in medieval times, but what were the Christians doing in the early times? Well, they were dying. You want to know why people celebrated All Saints Day? Obviously, it had nothing to do with paganism. No. They were being persecuted. You have here the body of Polycarp is burned. Polycarp, he was a disciple of John. It says the centurion then, seeing the strife, excited by the Jews, placed a body in the midst of the fire and consumed it. So this is basically him dying for his faith. But look what happens afterwards. Accordingly, we afterwards took up his bones as being more precious than the most exquisite of jewels and more purified than gold, and deposited them in a fitting place, whither being gathered together, and as opportunity is allowed us, with joy and rejoicing, the Lord shall grant us to celebrate the anniversary of his martyrdom, both in memory of those who have already finished their course. That sounds familiar. Sounds like someone wrote that in the New Testament. I've ran a race, I finished the course. And for the exercising and preparation of those yet to walk in his steps. That was as early as 150 AD. As early as 150 AD. That is mid-2nd century. So you already have in writing where Christians are starting to honor their fallen. Why? Because this is a time that they're being persecuted. This is a time they're being martyred. And this is their response, their Christian response. Now, I'm not going to read all this, okay? I believe I've been doing a lot of reading tonight. I don't want to lose anybody. So what I'll do is I'll simply just talk about it while it's on screen. If you guys want to pause it, that's fine. But this is now going from 150 to 270 AD. Now, this is called, quote, On All the Saints by St. Gregory Thaumaturgus. I believe that's Thaumaturgus, right? I'm always real good with my words. So you can see that, this is the part where they basically begin to go ahead and turn these celebrations into holy days, into festivals, right? I'm going to give you the oil of joy for mourning, for the spirit of heaviness. This just came to my mind right now. I remember in Isaiah 61, right? I'm going to give you the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness. In other words, of all these martyrs that are dying for the faith, their response is to celebrate them being triumphant over the world. They could have caved in. They could have said, "You know what? Fine, we'll serve your gods. I'm not gonna die. I'll go ahead. I'll light incense. I'll serve you as a god. I'll say my emperor is a god. Fine, I quit." No, they didn't do that. They chose to go the death route. They conquered death by keeping their faith till death. Wow. So now you got canons and councils. 306, 340, 363, 394. Remember, this is all 4th century. Look at these dates. Now, all of a sudden, when church councils would come together and they would make canons or laws, all of a sudden you start looking at some of these canons and they're talking about the feasts of saints. For all saints, all martyrs. And originally, All Saints' Day was first called All Martyrs' Day. In Ireland, it was held on April 20th. So much for Samhain. Throughout the rest of Europe, it was held on May 13th. The reason why they put on May 13th was because that was a day that they cleared out all the pagan gods from a certain temple that was there, and they basically put in all the saints. So they said, well, we might as well go ahead and celebrate them. And then from there, they begin to celebrate the All Saints Day and All Martyrs Day, basically around the time of the Feast of Pentecost. So a week after the Feast of Pentecost was basically after Easter. They begin to go ahead and do this. So now why they put it there, I'm not sure. That's just a church thing. So what's the problem with May 13th and April 20th? Well, the problem is that everyone keeps saying that November 1st was the day that Samhain was celebrated and the Christians celebrated on November 1st. Well, the problem is if they're supposed to be getting everything from Samhain, why didn't they just go ahead and start out on November 1st? Why were they going ahead and celebrating it on April 20th in Ireland and May 13th throughout all the rest of Christendom, especially in the East? So now this is another one, Saint Basil and Saint John Chrysostom. These guys basically talk a lot more about the feast. Again, I'm just going to leave it here. I'm not going to, I'll read the last part. Saint Basil says, "For on this day the apostles who were the first to preach the gospel appointed a feast in honor of all the saints, both those who had already departed in this life and those who were still living. And so throughout the world, this feast is celebrated in common, and all the saints are honored with a single celebration." Wow. I definitely got to unpack that in a study someday. But that's definitely true. So the question is this: why in the world did the Christians move from May 13th to November 1st? Now, the Samhain people, the people who say the origins of Samhain, they say that's why. Because Samhain was held on November 1st or sometime around that time, and the Christians were just basically trying to go ahead and Christianize. And that's the reason why they moved it. No, that's not why at all. The reason why they moved it is because people were hungry. You're doing it in the time of May when, things are in spring. The earth is just coming back into its full bloom. Well, that didn't look very good economically back in the day. It's not like people just go down to a fast food joint and get some food. The economics were different back then. So since you had all these people coming on in to celebrate, you had to feed them. So eventually, it just started creating like these little hunger famines everywhere. I mean, at first it was a little tolerable, but after a while, you do it over and over again, year after year, century after century, it's going to create these ripple effects. And so, because of that, the Pope thought it would be smarter if it was moved during a time where the food was plentiful. Well, what time is that? That's what? Harvest time. Now it's funny because when you look at people who, say they celebrate Samhain and stuff, they went by a lunar calendar. How do we know this? We know this by Saint Bede, the Venerable Bede. If you read in his writings, which I don't have here because, like I said, this is not everything, he ends up saying how Samhain is held on a lunar calendar. Well, what's the problem with a lunar calendar? A lunar, you're moving. So that's the reason why sometimes Samhain was held in September. Sometimes it was held in November. Sometime October 17th. Sometime it was here. Sometime it was there. Heck, I even heard one time it was held April 25th in Ireland, somewhere. But, it was moving all the time. Other times it was celebrated in September. So, when it came to the solar calendar, which the Christians depended on because of the Gregorian, like that in Rome, whatever. It was just the same every year. So who is moving into whose day then? Again, that's something to think about. So if you don't believe me, there are writers and authors who do affirm this. I'm not going to read this. You guys can read it on screen. And so that pretty much wraps up my piece. That was not everything. There's more in-depth studies that people have done, but I wanted to pull together at least some basics to show what was when was what happened when, what was it called first, what came from where, and I really hope that brought like a lot of clarity. So we celebrate the continuation of Christ's triumph over death through the triumph of the saints over the pagan gods and kingdoms of the world. Like some of the churches in the book of Revelation, they have overcome, as Christ said. We celebrate them as they intercede for us, for there is truly one church, both in heaven and on earth. Happy All Saints Day. So with that being said, if there's still anybody in the background is still with me, I'm going to go ahead and allow you guys up. If you guys want to go ahead and say anything first, let me go ahead and kind of fix this real quick and stop sharing my screen.
I don't know if you can hear me, but I just wanted to
And
say, very good job.
appreciate it. Appreciate it. Oh, hold on. Wait a second. Uh, there's someone in here named Derek, and it
Yeah,
says his device is not connected. I don't know what that's about, but yeah.
yeah.
So
Derek is one of the other brothers in Orthodox and Friends
okay,
chat that
yeah.
we're in.
But yeah, I'll go on mute, man. If you definitely want to say anything, or if you've seen anything in the chat that stuck out to you, um,
Not really. I mean, I've just been kind of talking to them already under my YouTube account.
awesome, awesome. And I'm seeing some people that I've never seen before. Wow. Um, awesome. Who is Violve Ekdulsi? Uh,
That's me.
oh, goodness. All right, cool. Let me see who else. Sammy Vidores. He says, quote, how do you wrestle with the idea of the relative principle or regulative principle that limits a Christian to only celebrate that which God states should be celebrated in Scripture? That's simple. The regulative principle is eliminated by the fact that the Christians themselves or the Jews themselves didn't really even use that. They didn't use that at all. And I say this all the time. If you look at Purim and Hanukkah, That's not written in the law of Moses to do. During the old covenant functioned obviously different from the new one. Everything was given up front. God, had the Levites write down exactly everything that they wanted, and we can read it. You know what I mean? Uh, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. I mean, everything was there. These are your feast days. This is what you do. This is the law. That's it. Now, if the Jews were truly sola scriptura, then you would not have Hanukkah exist. You would not have Purim exist. They would just be like, hey, you know what? I'm glad that the Lord got us through Haman, and Haman failed in trying to destroy us. I'm glad that God got us through, and He helped over. He delivered us from the Greeks, and Judas Maccabeus overthrew them. I'm glad, but we're not gonna make a feast day out of it. Now, what's the problem? That's not there. They did make feast days out of this. So this idea of a type of sola scriptura, it should have popped up right there twice. And then what makes it even worse, we all know that I believe it's in John chapter 10 or somewhere in John, where basically, especially if you read the NLT, Jesus celebrates Hanukkah. So again, that's the way I would handle that. See if the people in the scriptures actually held to this regulative principle. And if you find the opposite, well, there's your answer. You know, um, it seems like I guess he was the only person that had a question. Um, I don't see any other questions or anything, but
I had one just real quick. Would you
mhm.
argue that the modern twisting of the All Saints Day and Hallows Eve has been, as well as Christmas even, and Easter, based on a idea of humanistic like consumerism?
You're saying that you believe that Easter, Christmas, and all those places are celebrations. You're saying that you believe that they have somehow been twisted.
Not in the church itself, but in the worldly aspect, like in what people, how people nowadays who aren't Orthodox or aren't Roman Catholic practice those things.
Oh, most definitely. Because, and this is a reason why I brought Halloween up, because I personally believe that Halloween is the most, uh, it's the clearest example of that. More clear than Christmas, more clear than Easter, more clear than any of them, you know? Um, so I see that people had their own intentions of what they did, uh, that affected the holiday. You know, like Guy Fawkes Night, Mischief Night. Those people weren't trying to intentionally change or affect All Saints Day. I hate to say it, but All Saints Day was kind of, I guess, like the middleman of the person that was caught in the middle, if you really look at it.
That's exactly what I was thinking too, because I was studying. It's kind of funny that you bring this up because it was just yesterday that I was actually looking into this, and a lot of the things that you were talking about, I had
Yeah,
already seen in my own studies to begin with, and I found it very interesting because I was like, none of these things were done originally. It's just weird.
yeah. I mean, so again, you really have to wonder, like, what were the intentions of these people when they did what they did? You know,
Yeah.
uh, because today we are getting like, oh well, the Roman Catholic Church just tried to Christianize everything, and they took from the pagans and they added it. I believe a guy named Eugene here. He says, "quote I haven't heard much yet. Is so real leaning towards Christian or pagan? Leaning towards Christian, you know. Eugene, it seems like I guess he just got here. If I were you, definitely, I would definitely take it back. And yes, you know what? I'm doing good with my goal. I'm under an hour, so this is awesome. I kind of noticed that the videos are too long. People won't listen, so I'm trying to
Yeah, you should listen
add
to
more
them.
visuals and you know. But
They have a short attention span.
pretty much, and we have TikTok to thank for that. All
Oh
right,
yeah, Vine, TikTok, all of those little
look,
YouTube shorts. Man,
TikTok will do this to your attention span, man. Like oh man,
kill
my
it,
sister's
man.
always showing me stuff. Um, I think there's this guy on there. His name is Angry. Oh, I forget. I'll ask him in a bit. His name is Angry something, but oh man, he does cuss a lot, but he's funny because the things he's angry about they make perfect sense. But
Yeah,
you
you
can get
didn't
caught up on TikTok, like
to talk to Eugene for a second. Like you said, you should actually watch the video. I know it's kind of long, but he goes through the whole history and he goes through the inconsistencies of the historical sources that are used by people who consider it to be pagan. Um, we both would argue, I would say, that as of now, the way that it is in the West specifically, and how Halloween is practiced as a festival and as a holiday, yes, it has been paganized. Yes, it has been consumerized. Yes, it has been humanized. However, the original feast day is actually called All Hallows Eve in the Roman Catholic tradition, and it is the Orthodox tradition. It's called All Saints Day, which is just a commemoration of the lives of every saint, basically. All of these different practices kind of came later on, but those were the original practices of the feast day itself.
yeah, most definitely. Definitely, Eugene, look back earlier in the video. You'll definitely see that people, children and adults, and mainly the children, they would dress up as saints and do processions around the church because a lot of churches were not, they didn't have, I guess they weren't wealthy enough to have a lot of statues to process around their church in honor of the saints. So they themselves would dress up as a saint. Now, of
Yeah,
course,
we.
eventually
Oh,
this
go
led
ahead.
from them also going door to door as saints, and they would go ahead and pray for people that are soul cakes. I'm not going to go ahead and repeat what I said earlier, but definitely look at where that, stemmed from. Um, you know, so other than
Yeah,
that,
because he does definitely go through the history. Eugene. It's a lot. That's why he doesn't want to go through it again. I can understand why. It's
yeah,
50 minutes long, which is just a decent amount of time. You know, it's good to get everything in a synopsis. But yeah, the history is very convoluted. There's a lot of misinformation and conjecture, and assumptions and claims that don't have any actual substantiation in them, historically speaking. But if we're talking about the modern idea of these things, like Christmas with the Fat Man, Santa Claus, Red Suit, Coca Cola made that, we know that much.
wow.
You know, we have reindeer. That's not real. Well, reindeer, of course, are real. Flying reindeer, no, obviously. Elves. Well, the closest thing, I'm sorry, is going to be a dwarf with some kind of like ear disorder. But you're not gonna get any of the things that you see in modern day concepts of it, because a lot of it is humanistic folklore. They have mixed paganism into it, and I hate to say
Oh
that, but
yeah.
it's true. But within the boundaries of the church, whether it be the Roman Catholic or the Orthodox, depending on who you talk to in the Roman Catholic, they're different in that regard. Because if I'm not mistaken, they don't really care. They're very like hyper lenient on that. In the Orthodox
Yeah.
Church, it's not as lenient at all. Like, really, you shouldn't be dressing up as a demon. Really, you shouldn't be having haunted houses. Really, you shouldn't be opening up, doors to demons. It's just simple as that. But
Mm.
there's a huge history behind it, and like he said, just watch the video again if you have the time, and he'll explain all of the history for you.
Yeah. I definitely did want to say a few more things about some stuff. I'll say one more thing because, like I said, I really could go. I'm serious. I know that it is weeknight, and as much as I do want to say, I already know that it's getting a little late, and I already know how the wife gets. Sometimes I can't be on her too long. But one thing that did stick out to me even more on that point. There was another thing where it was during the, I think, 13th century again, maybe it was 11th century. where these men said that the veil between the living and the dead was thin. And what they were doing during this time is trying to bag a chick. Now you think that, if this is the way that the dead and the living is going on according to them, you think you would find something that a lot of people would say about Sam Hain and the paganism and the this and the that. No, you don't find that. We found a story where there are these guys every year. They go up to this place called the Fairy Mounds, and there'd be this dope, beautiful fairy woman. And, a guy would go up there with his best A game, and unfortunately, not only would he get rejected, or maybe he didn't make the cut, but he would mysteriously disappear.
That boy got
Now, there's,
he got whisked away.
yeah, like either A, it was because of this fairy chick, or B, some of the people he was competing against wanted to eliminate the competition. So maybe the guy behind him ended up kind of getting him because he wanted the chick. So that's a story that you find. And people think if they look back in the past that they're gonna find like, oh, pagan this and that. No. So far we got a story where people are doing sportly things and celebrating and drinking food and drinking ale, and then we got on the other side where every year these brothers go up there and they try to go ahead and get with a fairy. That's what you get back in them days. You don't during Sam Hain. So again, these are issues when people try to take ancient texts or ancient whatever, and they try to put I guess a modern conclusion to it. But like I said, I could go on and on. I really could. But I don't know. Maybe I'll have like a video where it's just pure open discussion because, of course, I got a lot to talk about. But you're right. When it comes to the church, we do not get involved with dressing up as demons, going to haunted houses, like you said. Now, I do know that some Protestants have done things that the church all over is doing, whether it's East or West, Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox. They're all doing trunk or treat. So they're taking a trick out of the trick or treat and they're doing trunk or treat. You know, and there are certain people who use that time to even evangelize. So there are still people today that will dress up as a saint, and when they come to the door, they open it up. And they're like, "Ooh, who are you?" Well, I'm saying so and so, and I'm dressing up like this, and this is why. And by the way, here's some candy, and they'll give them a little picture image of an icon. And if they're a Christian, they'll definitely keep them in things like that. But you never know where that little, just that little act will lead to. And again, like he is well within his right to do that because these all have Christian origins. So I made this video so we as Christians could just go ahead and take back what was began by those who died for the faith, you know? So instead of letting the enemy come on in and paganize our holiday, we push back and we re-Christianize our holiday. Amen. Dang, I feel like I'm preaching. I need to shut up now, but yeah. Other than that, that was my last piece. Logic. If you want to have the last word, you can, and we're gonna go ahead and just wrap it up. We're a little bit over an hour, so you know.
Nah, that's pretty much it, man. Because, like I said, the only things that, okay, for example, Easter. Originally it was Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene, she went to the Emperor Tiberius, if I'm not mistaken, was his name, or Tibius. I can't remember the one. But she went to him to proclaim the gospel, the resurrection of Christ. the emperor had mocked her and mocked the resurrection of Christ, saying, "A man can no more raise from the dead than that egg you're holding can turn red." And immediately the egg turned red. It's one of the things that we celebrate on Pascha. We paint the eggs red, to commemorate that day that he was proven wrong. And then you also have Christmas. There is no fat man in a jolly red suit. There is no flying reindeer. There are no elves. It's just a celebration of Jesus' birth. We call it the Nativity or Christmas, either one. Because in the West, it's Christ's Mass or the Mass of Christ, and Hallows Eve for the Westerners. It's basically All Saints Day. The commemoration of the lives of all saints. A lot of these new practices that you see in the West or in general, that wherever they're practiced in Europe or so forth, are done by consumerism. And a lot of paganism is added to it. But in the original sense that even we practice today, which we don't practice the way that the consumerism culture does, is different. It's unstained. And that's pretty much all I got to say. I think you're muted, brother.
Well, dang, there we go. I was saying that is profound because I attend the Orthodox Church on and off, and I remember they ended up having a Easter service and things, and I could not, I didn't understand this, but they painted these eggs red. I never knew why until I just listened to you just now, and to this day, I still have this red egg. So now I know why this egg here is red. It was because of the Virgin Mary. I never knew until you said that. So I really want to thank you.
Oh, well, Mary Magdalene specifically. But yes. I didn't know that either until my priest actually mentioned it to
me. Yep. So
yeah, it's craziness. That's one of the reasons why we paint the eggs red. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you, bro. Other than that, like
I didn't know a couple of things about the kids proceeding around the church and how they went door to door asking for bread. I didn't know any of that.
I like I said, I think we're just all learning off each other. And that's what makes history so beautiful, just to rediscover stuff. So with that being said, I think this was good. This is really good. Eugene, thank you so much. And who else was in the chat here? It was John Williams. Thank you, bro. Anybody else? I know that the chat looks different. Sammy, thank you so much. I know that the chat looks different from the live stream versus the back one I'm seeing. But other than that, God bless you guys. If you guys have any comments or anything, there he is. Okay, that's what he looked like. Okay, finally got a little image. I hear the kids in the background. But yeah, if you guys got any comments, leave your comments. If there's anything you want me to cover coming up, like Christmas, for example, I wouldn't mind doing that. And if you guys have any questions or anything for me at all, to reach out to me in general, you can always hit me up at ssoreal@gmail.com. Other than that, happy All Souls Day. Today's All Souls Day. Please continue to celebrate All Hallows Eve, All Saints Day, All Souls Day. Christ is risen. Indeed he is risen.
We should talk about how Thanksgiving is pagan. I'm just kidding.
You know what? Thanksgiving is actually Catholic.
That's the perfect way to end that.
We'll talk about it next time. We'll talk about it next time.
Yeah, we're good, brother. God bless everybody.